With the coronavirus cases now exceeding 121,000, the deaths climbing over 4,382, and the temperature of the country far surpassing hysteria, we're in a whole new level of panic, as far as I can see. I welcome Dr. Michael Finkelstein into the Brookfield Technology Center, Park City Productions 06604 studios to discuss exactly what is really happening and to do what he does as the slow medicine doctor, and that's slow everything down. Let's take a look at this entire outbreak from the time that it started to where we are now and parse out exactly what we're dealing with. What is hysterics and what is fact? Dr. Michael Finkelstein, as people who subscribe to this YouTube channel probably already know, is the slow medicine doctor. He's a holistic doctor based in Westchester County, New York. He is founder and executive director of the Slow Medicine Foundation and the founder and medical director of SunRaven, which is the home of slow medicine, a holistic wellness center located on a farm in beautiful Bedford, New York. And you can learn more at slowmedicine.org. His book is Slow Medicine, the Slow Medicine Approach to Health. And as I mentioned several times in the interview you're about to hear, a link to that book and to the Slow Medicine website is down below in the comment section if you are listening on YouTube. If you're listening on WBTN, thank you. I hope you learned something here. And for folks who hear snippets of this on WPKN News, we consider all of this information paramount that the doctor is about to give out because it forces you to consider alternatives beyond hand sanitizer and beyond Lysoling doorknobs. There's more here. And this way of looking at issues, whether it's coronavirus or any other calamity, from the measles recently in New York State to the SARS pandemic of a few years ago, Dr. Finkelstein started looking at these issues through a different lens after starting in conventional Western medicine. And we begin this conversation with Dr. Finkelstein looking back at the early years of his residency.
A few years of that type of practice, that Western medicine, while it was really good at helping people who were acutely ill, devastating crisis, and on the throes of death, or needing a surgical procedure emergently, was great. But for chronic conditions, things that people live with day to day, and for the bigger problem we face, which is to not only live well, but to have a good life, to do something important in our life, and to feel good about living, Western medicine really was disease-oriented and got you out of trouble in the deepest sense, but didn't really help you get on the path to something that I would call vitality. And my interest was really to help people do that. So after 10, 15 years of practicing Western medicine, I had the opportunity to start studying integrative and holistic medicine. And I went back to school to study with Dr. Andrew Weil at the University of Arizona and learned more about health and healing that I did in medical school, meaning more broadly learned about health and healing and the other systems of health and healing that are out there, and other concepts about what makes us healthy, which is not just our bodies then, but the integrated functions of our body, our mind, our spirit, our relationships, our community, the environment itself, and then even what we each do here to contribute to a collective conscious evolution. Well, after studying that for a few years, I became, I would say, somewhat intolerant of Western medicine, the limitations of it, the frustrations people had about the fact that doctors really were not interested to spend additional time with them to talk about how they could take care of themselves, things as simple and basic as nutrition or activity or movement or healthy aging or the psycho-emotional things that people were facing. So I was intolerant of not intolerant, but I was intolerant of the institutions surrounding medicine, not of doctors, not of healthcare workers in other capacities, but of the institution which was helping people focus on disease as opposed to focus on living. And so I decided to branch out, set up my own health center, which we call SunRaven, which is in Bedford, New York, and is an integrated practice of me, my wife, who's a psychospiritual counselor, and a lot of colleagues and friends who together help support people in our community and wider because of the book that I wrote, Slow Medicine, and other connections that I have now developed to educate people and influence them, maybe inspire them to take the initiative on of being healthier themselves. And that's the principle of Slow Medicine, is how to help yourself, not a self-help book, but how to help yourself.
And we'll put a link to the book in the section below on YouTube. It's like the Bible in my house. What I appreciate is that you offer people an alternative, different way of looking at their health. Holistic is a kind of a word that's like organic almost. It's been beaten, it's been massaged. It depends who you're talking to, what it means. But you never discredit conventional medicine, I think. I've never felt preached to by you, which is why I appreciate what you do. And ironically, I think now more than ever, what you offer people is going to come in very handy as we deal with the coronavirus. And I guess talk to us a little bit about what this virus is. What is COVID-19? Right. I mean, some of the scary numbers today, coronavirus cases, we're at 121,735. The death toll is climbing since I turned the laptop on, 4,382. What is this virus? Why is it so obtuse? And I guess explain to us how it all started. I'm suspicious when I hear that someone ate a bat in Wuhan at a exotic animal market. Could that possibly be?
Yeah, well, yes, it could possibly be. Coronaviruses are a family of viruses. So there are herpes viruses, as an example, which cause herpes simplex, cold sores, genital herpes. There's varicella zoster, which causes chicken pox and shingles. These are families. They have peculiar names, of course, sometimes based on people who founded them and named them. Sometimes it was a feature that they have. So coronavirus is a family of viruses. Corona is derived from a word that means crown, is a virus that when looked at under an electron microscope has sort of like these spikes out of the top of it. Sort of looks like a crown. So it's called coronavirus as a family. It's a family that was first discovered, I think, in the 1960s or 70s, maybe a little sooner than that. It turned out to be the most common group of viruses that cause the common cold. So it was an important virus, very contagious, very infectious. And most of the viruses for a while were simple infections, upper respiratory tract, self-limited, not particularly lethal. Until 2003, when SARS, S-A-R-S, South Asian Respiratory Syndrome.
The bird flu.
No, that's not the bird flu.
It's a different.
Yeah, South Asian Respiratory Syndrome, because there was a bird flu, which is an influenza type of virus. So influenza is good catch, and it's another group of family viruses. So when you hear bird flu, influenza, it's a family in the influenza virus. So it's a different family. But that was also an important epidemic. But SARS in 2003 and 2004 was a serious illness that had a mortality rate of something close to, I want to be careful with numbers here, but 30% of people who got SARS. But it was not terribly contagious, so it was limited pretty quickly. But it was a scare. And it was the first time that a coronavirus appeared that was particularly lethal. A few years later, there was MERS, M-E-R-S, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which was another coronavirus. And that had a higher mortality rate, but was also not particularly contagious. So it limited itself. But when these first came out, a lot of the news was similar to what happened in the last couple of months here and now, which was, oh my God, there's this new virus. It's infecting people. It's killing them. And that is scary, when you hear news like that. And you do worry that infectious diseases could spread because there have been epidemics and pandemics in the early 20th century, the flu and, then the bird flu and other things like that over the course of the last 100 years. There have been epidemics that have really been widespread, circumnavigated the globe quickly, not only infected a lot of people, but killed a lot of people. And so there's always been concern that this could happen again. Of course, we have the history of the plague, which killed a third of all Europeans in the 14th century. That's substantial. So plagues and epidemics are not new. Human societies have always faced them periodically, fortunately relatively infrequently, but they're like disasters waiting to happen. And when they happen, people do freak out, like you're saying, hysteria. It's a natural response to something that's coming at you that you can't see in particular, and therefore you can't prevent so easily with, let's say, just swatting it away. You know, if you're in a car and there's another car coming at you and you're driving, you can turn the wheel. That's scary, but it's time limited and, you know, you have some control. This, for people, though I don't think it's true, but this is what I think is underlying some of the human response to this, is people feel out of control right now. They don't feel like they have a way to help themselves, which is what I'd like to address, because I think there are ways people can help themselves. But
that's why I asked you to come here today.
But there are the news,
because I'm in that group.
The news is interestingly talking about the numbers and the scary numbers and the number of people who've died, and they're not putting it into proper perspective either. The number of people who die from this is serious. Every single person who dies is a loss that affects a family and is sad and will cause grieving and is devastating. And if it was your family, you know, I can't say enough to comfort a person like that. So there are those people who are being affected this way. But if we look at it collectively as a whole, 7 billion people on the planet, and we look at numbers and the things that kill us, we have to realize that in the United States alone, every day, 1,600 people die of cancer. 3,200 people die every day of automobile accidents. 100 and something people die every day of suicide. These are epidemics also. These are hurting people also. What I feel is important here is to see that right now, even though the numbers could increase with coronavirus and the infectivity and obviously harm more people, the trajectory does not look like it's going to be that devastating. I just want to say that again. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know. A lot of the science here is not yet there. Not only is it inconclusive, but it doesn't even exist yet in terms of the epidemiology, the seasonality of this. There's other factors that we don't know yet. But the mortality of this coronavirus seems less than the mortality of SARS and MERS, for sure. It seems maybe more than influenza, but it's less infectious than influenza. And so
less infectious.
It seems that way now. Even though the numbers are growing, it seems less infectious. So we don't know where it's going to be. We should be prepared. And we have to mitigate fear, because fear is one of the most damaging things to your immune system. And if you are accepting the reality that there's a chance you're going to be exposed to this, which I think is a fair thing for people to think about and accept, even though it's hard and even though you'd like to be in denial and like to believe you're in a little pocket that won't get it. Maybe that's true, but I think it would be wise not to ignore what you can do now, so that even if you were unlucky, if you were incorrect with your analysis, you were still prepared. And the truth is that the preparation I would offer people for this would help them for cancer, automobile accidents, suicide. And so that's the basis of slow medicine, which is a way of living that would help mitigate the challenges that people face, particularly those that are preventable, or those that maybe can't be completely prevented, but when you get them, you recover more effectively. And that's what I'd like to focus on and help people focus on.
What's funny is, for some folks, being responsible for yourself may be a more daunting hill to climb.
It is. If I could package this in a pill, I could sell it.
Slow medicine.
Slow medicine.
Yeah.
I know I could sell it. But what I can't do is to package it in a pill. What I can do is explain, well, what does it take? Let's say you just want to focus on your immune system, your immunity. What would it take to make your immune system function at its highest level? You could ask me that question. In fact, that's the perfect question right now. And then I would give you a long list of things you can do. One might be to get enough rest every night. or to drink enough water that your mucous membranes are constantly well hydrated, because that, in the case of infectious diseases that land on these mucous membranes, helps you move them off of your mouth and into your stomach, where the digestive enzymes and other things in your stomach can help eliminate these organisms, let's call them. Virus technically is not an organism, but these infectious agents, before they get into your lungs. Because in the case of coronavirus, it seems like the lung is the primary area that has the most receptors for this particular virus. And that's why people are suffering from lower respiratory tract illnesses, not the typical upper respiratory tract illnesses of other coronaviruses.
We hear that you have to drink a lot of water. That's one of the reasons why, and I think it's so important that we're sitting here talking to you, because without hearing it from you, my family could hear it from me, but they're not going to. Right. So yeah. I'm glad that you're here to explain why something as common sense as drinking a lot of water will help protect you. Why will getting a proper amount of sleep protect you?
Well, because our body needs to rest and restore. For many years, scientists and maybe people think to themselves, there's no real reason for sleep. That's substantial. Some people are proud of themselves. They can go 3 or 4 hours a night and they're okay. But the truth is, there's a lot of things that happen at nighttime in particular. And this, of course, is hard to deal with sometimes for shift workers who work at night and are up during the day, just as an aside. But let's leave it for the majority of people who do close their eyes somewhere at night when it's dark. But there's not only a restorative function, meaning a regeneration of energy, but your body sorts itself out. Your body cleanses itself at night when you're not eating and assimilating nutrients. Your body has a chance to take out the garbage, essentially. That's on the cellular level. The cellular level garbage can be eliminated when the cells are not being asked to digest new food. And that keeps cells in balance to do the things that they're meant to do, which is, in this one respect, is to generate the proteins, the antibodies, and the health and vitality of the immune cells of the body to surveil the system, to identify an invader, and to get rid of it effectively. And so sleep is one of those important features of a healthy immune system. And 7 or 8 hours is the answer to how much.
You said something interesting there, and I know you're a proponent, I believe, of intermittent fasting, or even just fasting.
Right.
That's associated to what you just discussed as well?
Yeah, because when you need to give your body enough time to clean itself out, and the question is, well, how much time is that? For most people, it's 16 hours, not just what you do when you're sleeping, but 16 hours. We tend to eat way too much and too frequently, and for too many hours of the day to stay in this balance. And so I like the idea of people extending the period of a fasting state on a daily basis. Just think of the word breakfast, break fast. Why would that be the name of that meal? It implies that there was a fast that preceded that every morning, that there was a period of hours that naturally would occur where people weren't eating. If you go back to our evolution as a species, we didn't have refrigeration and storage units and stores to buy things. So we weren't eating nearly as much. We would eat periodically when food was available, and we may have some storage. Early humans may have figured out how to dry meat, and early agriculture provided some stored substance. But in fact, it was when agriculture began, when things about human health started to change to become more modern, which includes the diseases of modern life, like diabetes, like cancer, like heart disease. Probably not so common before agriculture, in fact. And some of that may have had to do with the fact that people didn't eat as often and as many hours. So that's just one part of it. There's other benefits of intermittent fasting, which is to not overeat. Nutrition is a big category with regard to how one takes care of themselves. The information out there that circulates is confusing for most people, but it's really important to eat good quality food to start with. Processed foods, in general, should be eliminated. That's everything that's in a box or in a can that's not a single whole food. So you can get, let's say, peas in a can, so that's a whole food. But typically what's in a can, like a soup or something like that, is processed. It's pre-cooked. It's got a lot of ingredients, and it's got to have some preservatives to keep it in a can and not make you sick.
If you could see the face he makes when he says the word can.
So there's, all the bread, cakes, cookies, chips. I hate to say it. I know people love it. I love it. I'll be honest. I love these foods, but there's a balance to how much one consumes. And if you're concerned about your immune system, then you will understand that if you cross a line, and I can't tell you what that line is, but for your own sake, understand that there's some line which is probably not much of that can be afforded to keep your immune system really healthy. If you happen to smoke anything, this is a time to stop smoking, because your lungs are the area of your body most susceptible to the invasion, if you will, the attachment of this infectious disease to get into your system. And if your lungs are already impaired, they're filled with inflammatory molecules in response to the smoke and the inhalant products, whatever that is, whether it's tobacco or marijuana or what's in vaping these days and the oils and everything else, I would urge people now is the time to quit. And this is not a small suggestion. Normally, John, you know me, I don't get that down and serious and focused and even prescriptive. But if one is concerned about coronavirus, and I think everyone has a right to be somewhat concerned, not fearful, but somewhat concerned, then the answer is don't look for somebody to give you a pill or like a vaccine either.
We'll talk about that in the next segment, by the way.
That'd be nice potentially if it worked without a downside, but it's going to take a while. So before that gets developed and is available to you, certainly there is no pill now by itself that's going to do it. You've got to think about where these viral particles are going to land on your body and how your body's going to respond to them when they do. And this is the time, if you care, rather than complain about the government not doing enough or this not being available or whatever. I get that. Those are all sort of legitimate concerns. Also, we need to look at societal's response to this and our own governments and everything else, and even the source of this virus. That's a whole nother question you alluded to.
In segment 2.
Yes. But the current issue is forget where it came from or what, people in Washington are doing or anywhere else in the world. What are you doing? And what are you doing now is getting rest, drinking enough water, eating well, stopping smoking, getting outside every day.
Literally not one of those items have been bandied about on the news.
Correct.
As options.
Right. And so people are not being given information to be empowered.
Yeah.
In fact, quite the opposite. People are told to run, hide. And that scare, that fear is, it may make sense on one level to suggest to people to circulate less, to avoid crowds, yes, I get that. But run and hide is what you're really hearing.
Yeah.
Stay home, lock the doors. There's lockdowns, quote unquote, in towns.
As a door just slammed in the hallway.
Yeah.
Listen, the studio that we used to do the show from in New Rochelle, New York, at WVOX, is that area
is locked down.
Is locked down. So,
right.
So fortunately, we're here in the Brookfield Technology Center, Park City Productions 06604 Satellite Studio. We're speaking with Dr. Michael Finkelstein. The topic of the day, the topic of the topic of every day since, I don't know, the beginning of the new year has been the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk more about ways to protect ourselves, about what is so novel about this novel COVID-19, and more suggestions on how to better protect ourselves from this and any other disease. So stay with us.
Hi, I'm Ryan Perry with Brookfield Technology Center, a women-owned, Native American-owned minority business. We do phone systems, video surveillance, firewalls, servers, door access control, all your cabling needs.
And why do people want to call a professional to protect themselves?
Well, a lot of times you need to make sure you're up to date. People think they buy the equipment and that's it, they install it. But a lot of times you need to do all the updates and perform all the maintenance on it to keep it running properly.
And that's what you do here at Brookfield Technology Center.
Yes, we do monthly contracts, or we can remote in and or come to site and make sure it's all up to date and make sure you're in compliance.
And how do people get in touch with you?
You can give us a call at 203-775-5009 or look us up on the web, www.btc America.com.
And the slogan is Brookfield Technology Center.
All things computer.
We're excited to announce that Jim Campbell Radio has now been unveiled on YouTube. You search Jim Campbell Radio. When you get there, please subscribe. You'll get all our updates. Content is regularly updated. And Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell and Business Talk with Jim Campbell, all of our podcasts are right there for you. All of this new consolidated data, content updated regularly. Jim Campbell Radio.
So welcome back, and we're talking with Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the slow medicine doctor. Some folks listening on our YouTube channel, if you look to the side on the archives, you'll find some of the shows that we've done over the last few years available at the Park City Productions YouTube channel. We touched on a couple of things that I thought were so important in the last segment, and that is that the advice coming from CNN, from the doctors on CNN, some of your peers. I even heard some of former guests, Dr. Oz. Wash your hands, self-quarantine. Nothing about diet, nothing about sleep.
Right.
Is there anything to the hand sanitizer shortage? First of all, the way people are acting is grotesque, I think. I mean, emptying the shelves of hand sanitizers and selling them at a markup on eBay, I think that's a bigger problem, quite frankly. But talk to us about sanitizing, about making the area, our surface areas, clean, and how realistic is that of a way of protecting ourselves?
Well, if this was a one-and-done type of exposure, meaning, there was some dust cloud that came over with a pollutant or a toxin and you can clean it out of your house once and be done with it, it might be advisable to thoroughly clean your surfaces, et cetera, and then you'd be done. But one has to think about this as a recurring wave that's almost impossible to run away from. And so I think it makes sense to consciously, as it would normally, wash your hands before you eat. If you're in a public space holding on to rails, let's say, mass transportation or, grocery carts, these are things to wash your hands after contact. That would be true because of all the number of infectious diseases which sort of are on those handles to begin with. Doorknobs, menus in restaurants, people who put their bags on the floor when they eat, and pick them up again and put them on the counter of their kitchen. I mean, there's all sorts of things people do. It makes sense to think about general hygiene. It makes sense to wash your hands. I think hand washing is more important here than sanitizers. And the reason is sanitizers, let's say with alcohol in particular as the most common antiseptic, are good for bacteria, not particularly good for viruses.
And we established in the first segment that there's a big difference between the two.
Right. And so this is a virus. And it's interesting. The more you wash your hands, especially if you put a drying agent like alcohol on your hands, the more you're going to wash off the protective waxes and oils that are on your skin, which are there for a reason, to become a barrier for other things so that they don't penetrate. So you have to be mindful of how much of this you're going to do. It's not advisable either to be overly neurotic about hand washing every time you touch something and use agents like detergents and alcohols. Now that said, you should wash your hands with soap and water. That's the most effective thing I think you can do, because with the water running off your hands is going to wash off any debris that's accumulated into a sink and then down the drain. Whereas washing your hands with a hand sanitizer basically is rubbing your hands together and moving things around, but if you're not killing the viruses so much and you're just killing bacteria and you're taking off oils, what are you doing? You're sort of maybe making it, frankly, paradoxically, more likely that the viruses will be the one thing left. I don't even want to debate it too much. I don't want to add more confusion. It's okay to do any of those things. It's also even okay to wear a face mask and to try to prevent, especially if you're in a crowd, aerosolized droplets from hitting you right away and directly in an area of your upper respiratory tract, which you can't prevent, inhaling or something like that. So there's probably some protection of that, quite frankly. But more important to me is to accept the reality that you're going to be exposed, no matter how much of this you're going to do. And so that you really, I believe, would be better turning your focus, or at least adding to your focus and prioritizing your focus on your immune system, on your general health and vitality. Even if you do those other things, I'm not going to debate them. I'm not going to tell people not to do those things. I'm just going to tell them that the advice given may not be all that it is, and it's certainly not going to prevent everything. So if you are one of those few who, despite washing your hands, and despite not touching your face, and despite not going into crowds,
I never realized how much I like to touch my face.
Yeah, I think most people do all the time. And so certainly before we eat, we're putting food directly into our mouth. But if you focus on the health and vitality of your whole system, then not just for coronavirus, but for everything else, you're going to be the beneficiary. This could be the best thing collectively that's ever happened to people if they get this message. Learn to take care of yourself and do it. Finally, stop smoking. Finally, eat whole food from sources that you can trust with wholesome ingredients. Finally, get enough rest. Finally, deal with stress. Finally, deal with your relationships that are stressful. Finally, dealing with, your purpose in life and pursuing more of what you're passionate about. Finally, get outside and spend time and enjoy nature. Finally, look at your own home and clean it up, in terms of things like, dust and dirt and mold, electromagnetic fields in the form of technology. We're sitting in a booth with quite a lot. But the idea is, where you sleep, you make it as peaceful and tranquil as possible, keep your mind clear, reconnect yourself to sort of your purpose, your spirit. These are the things that energize you. These are the things that not just make you immune, but whatever happens to you makes your life better in terms of quality. And when your life is better in terms of quality, the quantity of your life is likely to improve. This is how you're immune. You're not just immune to viruses. You're immune to the bombardment of all sorts of other stuff out there. You're immune to bad news. You're immune to bad people. You're immune to, discouraging thoughts. These are what we can do to be healthy. If we did this collectively and supported each other in that process, this could be a turning point for us. That's what I hope for.
That is definitely a best case scenario. I mentioned how I just was so turned off to see that there is something even in the human condition that would drive people to hoard something like toilet paper or hand sanitizer.
I was talking to my son about this last night. When people panic, you can imagine in a tight room, let's say a movie theater, and smoke starts sort of percolating out somewhere and people get all panicky that there's fire and they have to run to the exits. We know what happens. There's this trampling over people phenomena in crowds that are stirred to panic. What that means is people lose their sense of order and direction and balance and decision making. They are compelled to act and to run, but their actions are random and you could even say reckless. It's a phenomenon. So this hoarding is just another way people act when they're compelled by fear to do something to protect themselves in safety. And they think about, what do they need? They need something. When, in American culture, and this is a critique of American culture, when we're in trouble, we think we need to use money to buy ourselves out of trouble. We buy stuff. Yeah. It's the response. Not we look to our neighbors and friends to see if we can get support and help and hold hands and hold hearts and do that and pull together our currently available resources. But we look to take stuff out of our pocket, meaning something like money, and buy it with it. And then we think somehow that protects us. It's a cultural, educated response. The word culture is an interesting word, by the way. It's the same derivative as the word cult. A lot of people have moral judgments of cults. Culture is a accepted cult. The accepted cult of our current establishment is that when, we are challenged, we will buy products. This is the cult of capitalism. It's old. This is not necessarily the time to fix it, but it is the time to recognize what it is. There's a healthier way to respond, which is for each person to sort of get it, take control of their own lives, think about it carefully, listen to and talk to other people who support the notion that it's time to change this cult into one of cooperation, one of love and compassion, And if we did that in response to coronavirus, we would start looking at the environment. We would start looking at, was this virus a naturally occurring infectious disease that came from bats? You made the point that somebody ate a bat in Wuhan. Coronaviruses typically have their natural reservoir in bats. However, it does not appear that this particular coronavirus has a natural reservoir in a bat. It's not been discovered yet. Instead, looking at it genetically and looking at some of its features, some of the scientists that I listen to, because I think they're more open-minded and authentic, are concerned that the elements of this virus appear to have been crafted by technology, that this is not a naturally occurring virus, which leads to the question of weaponized, biologicals. And
it's a potentially scarier scenario.
Well, it's part of what I'm talking about now, just in response to the hoarding of toilet paper, which is, can we look at everything that has happened to contribute to this moment? Is it the ecosystem? Let's say it was a bat. Let's say I just want to, be balanced here. Let's say it's not. Go down the path of some sort of conspiracy. And
but I do want to address that after.
But I think we have to be fully open-minded, and that might be a path we need to explore. That path, or let's say it's natural to bats. How did the bat get into the soup? The question could be, well, that's because people in China eat bats. But they don't eat bats so much anymore, because when SARS came up, and SARS was clearly a bat-related disease, the market for bats and for this particular type of cat, which was another host of this coronavirus, was very limited in China as a result. People started to wake up that some of these foods no longer really a good idea because they're reservoirs. Like Ebola is a reservoir in an animal, monkeys. And so people stopped eating them, and that will be helpful. But let's say it came from a bat. Why would the bats be in the soup? Maybe because they were domesticated and eaten in soup, or maybe because the natural habitat of the bat was destroyed and the bats now come closer to human habitation. And so, as an example, I'm sort of quasi making this up, but it's a relevant consideration, which is the world climate affecting the incidence of this new emerging virus, even if it was natural? Is it the environment in terms of forests that have been cut down that have changed the distribution of certain animals and then their associated infectious diseases? One would have to think, if it's not this one, it's going to be another one. And it still should be examined. And so we can collectively, spend more time and more thought with people who are talking about this as a way to resume control and to take this to a higher level. The more we apply our higher states of being onto this, the more beneficial the total result could be.
It's not unreasonable to consider something like climate change, something like deforestation, how in a roundabout way could have caused something like this. I mean, sometimes I think about cutting back on something like the raising of cattle.
Right.
The impact that could have is so much more important to our carbon footprint, in my humble opinion, than worrying about the emissions from our vehicles here in Fairfield County.
Right. No, there's a lot of people who studied this carefully who would suggest, if you ask the question, where are all these, where are the greenhouse gases coming from that are affecting the solar penetration on the Earth, and then all the other things that are downstream related to that are consequential. And you can look at auto emissions, of course, and other emissions of factories, and that contributes. But you're right, the methane gas produced by the incredibly large industry to produce meat for consumers, and the related food for the meat for the consumers. So that large fields of soybeans and corn that are fed to those animals are fertilized in a certain way. And, of course, forests are cut down to make way for the land that's required for all of that agriculture, whether it's the food for the animals or the animals themselves. And that has tremendous effects in terms of the carbon emissions and the carbon dioxide that's produced on the planet. And
it's incredible how uncomfortable this makes some people. not only people who have vested interest in agriculture and farming and in the production of meat, but also because I think people feel judged, for their lifestyle.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When I was starting my sort of renewed life studying holistic medicine and these other systems of health and healing, and nutrition was a big part of that. I really learned nutrition, which was not part of the curriculum of medical school. And I was not. Right. And I got excited about the things that I learned. At that time, I had young children who were in elementary school. And I went to the elementary school in my community with this knowledge that I thought would be very useful for the health and well-being of our kids in the community. And there was some initial reception, like the teachers and some of the administrators, but when it got to the higher levels, it was shot down. My idea that we should have whole foods in the cafeteria for our kids, not just all this processed food, that we should maybe eliminate certain types of a food that have certain type of unhealthy oils and fats, or foods that don't really reflect the advice you would give somebody if they asked what's the best food to eat. And so I said, wouldn't it be important for us to start with our kids, these young, vulnerable people, not only to give them food for their own well-being now, but to educate them properly as part of their education? And there was, we can't do that, was the answer. And then I said, well, what do you mean you can't do that? And they said, well, the parents would not allow this. They would not want their kid to come home from school and say, hey, Mom and Dad, we can't have French fries anymore. Because the parents, is sort of what you're saying, the adults in the room are listening, and they have a lifestyle. They like certain things. So when I said people should think about processed foods and really limit them, if not eliminate them, yes, I bet a lot of people of you listening right now are getting a little irritated with me that I would propose, suggest that to you because, that's important to you. Now, I get that. So, but other things are important to you too, I know, like your health and well-being and the health and well-being of your children and the long-term viability of this planet.
I mean, you're worried about the coronavirus.
Yeah. So this is maybe...
You're petrified.
That's why I think this is an opportunity. But the media, as you're pointing out, the typical mainstream media is not spending time with, well, what can we do as individuals and as a society in the face of this? Not just how we protect ourselves from the disease, but how can we look at health and vitality as the subject and improve our condition collectively that make diseases like this, not just this one, less likely, that the peril associated with any change in our climate, less likely, the cooperation among people in any town, region, country, and the world together is elevated so that we can face some of these real threats in a way that's not just with fear and with a warlike mentality, let's kill it, but let's change the climate, not the literal climate, but the whole climate of our condition as a humanity, such that these things, of course, they'll probably always happen to some extent, but we'll be okay. And we'll be more immune. And we'll be able to thrive, even in the face of them. That's a different type of leadership. That's a different type of model of living. That's not the current culture. It's something that I think we could choose if enough people get on board.
And we've managed to not even say specific names here. So I wanted to avoid getting political, doing air quotes now, but it's impossible to avoid getting political. But I appreciate that we're not alienating, I don't think, anyone listening on WPKN, on WBTN, folks tuning in on YouTube. This is a holistic conversation in the most general sense, meaning I want to include everybody in thinking about this differently. We have one more segment coming up. I want to do a rapid fire, kind of a recap of what we've discussed. But on the way out of this segment, I recently became a dad, and you talk about changing people's views and perceptions. I have family that literally behaves as if we are denying my daughter basic rights of childhood by not letting her eat box cake and chocolate syrup.
Yeah. Well, so this is the cult. And so, and what happens with cults, when somebody is not following the rules of the cult, they are threatened in a sometimes subtle but occasionally not so subtle ways of, well, you are violating a principle, and it comes across on its face as maybe it makes sense. You sometimes think to yourself, is that right? We have to question ourselves because we're also indoctrinated into this cult ourselves. We're sensitive to some of the energy associated with some of those statements. And of course, we want to have good relationships with people like our parents. However, some of that is thrown at us because that's...
Well, you ate box cake and you turned out fine.
Yeah, I did. And I was eating hot dogs while I was in medical school because that was the food trucks outside the hospital. And I didn't know better. But when you know better, certainly when you've had experience of your own life and you know you don't feel as well as you used to, and it's not always about aging. Sometimes it's about how you take care of yourself. And you say, well, this isn't necessarily working. If you look around at the public, you go to the typical public space that might be the, poster child for what's America look like, Disney World. And then you walk into that space and you look around and you say to yourself, are these people healthy? I think most people would say... I
had that revelation walking down Flamingo.
Americans are not the model of health. And so what those people are doing are maybe not what I want to do. Right. They're feeding their kids box cake. As one example.
We're talking coronavirus. We're talking protecting ourselves, not just from this virus, but also... on a much greater level, and some basic things that could be done. And you used to like to say, try this for a little while and then tell me how you feel.
Yeah.
So we have one more segment coming up. Again, I want to thank folks on WBTN for running this as a special presentation, and WPKN News. We'll be right back with Dr. Finkelstein.
Recover Now is a national campaign aimed at the education and awareness of the devastating effects of opioid and heroin abuse and curbing drug and alcohol addiction in the United States. Recover Now is sponsored by treatment facilities nationwide. Many of them have been where you are, and they want to help by spreading a message of hope and recovery. They're working hand in hand with major insurance companies nationwide that can help you or a loved one get clean in 7 to 30 days. Recover Now is embarking on a national outreach campaign on TV and radio to promote anti-addiction messages. So if you, a loved one, or someone you know has a problem with drugs or alcohol, do not wait. A new life for you could be 30 days away. Call us right now. I promise this call can change your life. Sponsored by the Detox and Treatment Helpline.
800-357-8110. 800-357-8110. That's 800-357-8110.
Would you like to host your own radio program or podcast? Park City Productions 06604 is a Bridgeport, Connecticut-based radio broadcast solutions company. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Park City Productions 06604. Call us at 203-522-8801.
All right, so we're back. Our final segment, we're talking coronavirus, and we're looking at it from a different lens, definitely, than you'll get over on CNN or on your local evening news, and that is that we're kind of taking some personal responsibility for our health, protecting ourselves before. I guess, Dr. Finkelstein, your advice is don't try and avoid it, because that's not an effective way of doing it.
I would say avoid it in practical ways without buckling down and stopping your life so severely that you end up suffering from, feeling confined and fearful in confinement. But not to assume avoiding it is entirely possible. And then just putting all your eggs in that basket.
And what do you think about all of the canceled events? I mean, they canceled the St. Pat's Parade in Boston. Coachella is canceled. South by Southwest, on and on and on. But you're still going to Mexico.
Well, I'm going to Mexico because I'm leading a health program there, which is a detox and cleanse retreat for 2 weeks. Yes, and I was in London last week and flew. I'm not living in fear. I'm not being arrogant, and so bold to think that I couldn't be exposed and that I might not come back and expose other people I care about. But I feel like I'm taking care of myself very well. I feel very confident in my immune system's ability to be immune to this. And I would like to help other people get that confident. When people are that confident, they go on in their life the way they would want to, taking some reasonable precautions. So I'm taking some supplements for my immune system and for keeping my nasal passages and mouth moist, and I'm doing a little bit more diligent things that way. I'm washing my hands a little bit more frequently than I have. But I was in a stadium with 60,000 people watching a football match. And so you could say, Michael, that's silly or stupid.
Manchester, you?
No, Arsenal. And I went to a Chelsea game, too. We went to 2 matches in London.
Good fun.
And the point is I was with my son. And this is something I do with my son every year. It's part of my relationship to my son, which is, one of the 5 or 6 most precious people in my life. And so the question is, if I confine myself, do I can take away, do I affect those relationships? Short term. I'm not just talking about long term. A lot of people will say, well, but, if you get your son sick and does something, has something terrible happen to him, then what good did you do? I mean, there's ways of looking at this, and I basically tell people you have to make your own decision. But I also say, in addition to deciding to hunker down or to avoid crowds, if that's your choice, avoid travel, avoidance isn't the only thing I would suggest you do. I would suggest you take the initiative to clean up your act, to take care of yourself, to take care of your environments, the way I spoke about before, and to strengthen your mind toward the more positive achievement here, which is, in the end, not only are you going to survive here, but you're going to thrive. You're going to learn something about taking care of yourself. You're finally going to do things you've talked about doing, and you're going to take this challenge, meet it, and succeed in a way that it takes you to another level in your life. And if you can support others around you to do that and not live in fear, not live recklessly, but not live in fear, and you draw the line where that is, that may mean, like I said, you don't travel. But on the other hand, for some people, it might mean, no, I'm going to go about the business of my life the way I normally do, taking reasonable precautions, and I feel better about it because I'm taking good care of myself. If you're smoking and eating crap and you're doing things that are notoriously damaging to your immune system and make you more susceptible.
But I'm doing it from home. I'm quarantined.
Well, so that's the point. So you might avoid this first wave of this virus. If it turns out to be like influenza, then 2/3 of people will be exposed in any year. Not everyone gets sick. Be careful with, interpreting my words 2/3 or the numbers. Exposed doesn't mean sick. Sick doesn't mean dead. But the idea is to think about completely avoiding this is avoiding the opportunity of really taking care of yourself. And this is what I think is the better focus. And my advice to people, particularly people who are really susceptible to lung diseases or have a lot of other chronic stuff going on, or who know their immune system isn't really great, they're susceptible to a lot of colds and they get really bad expressions of those colds or other infectious diseases, then those are the people that might make sense at this point till it becomes a little more clear to do less than more. But somebody who's healthy and vital and feels good about what they're doing, I wouldn't suggest that they stop their life.
In our last couple of minutes, some rapid fire questions here. Why do you think that this particular virus seems to be handled better by the young people? I mean, I'm happy to say that our infants seem to be in less danger. Why is that? Why versus folks in...
Well, there's a couple of possibilities. One is coronaviruses, as I mentioned in the first segment, are the same group of viruses that are the most common cause of the common cold. young children are likely to experience common colds more frequently. And potentially they have some natural immunity. I don't know that that's true or borne out, but I believe the epidemiology suggests there's something inherently protective in a child. So it could be some type of natural immunity. The other is that the respiratory membranes tend to be the area most susceptible. Children don't smoke. Now, there are middle-aged children who do start smoking, but young children tend not to smoke. Their airways are pretty clean. They have not lived decades in a polluted world. That's another possibility. The third is children don't carry phones. There is a relationship between immunity and cell phones.
So should I be keeping... My daughter grabs mine out of my hands all day long.
Well, so there's two aspects. There's the receptor, which is the phone itself, and then there's the signals floating in the atmosphere between towers and between phones that most environments have, including Wi-Fi in most residences and in many other buildings. Children tend to not be carrying the receptor quite as much as adults. But yes, avoiding phones. Now, there are different networks. There's, 3G, 4G, 5G. What those means is the amount of gigahertz of the signal, meaning how fast the frequency is. The faster the frequency, the more penetrant it is. Penetrant into the human body and through the human body, like gamma radiation is penetrant compared to microwaves, which don't penetrate. So we know that higher frequency radiation can cause disruption of the nuclear function of cells in organisms. So it seems that there's a relationship between immune system health and the 4G networks, and it seems to be 100 times worse in 5G networks.
I was literally just at a Verizon panel with another show host, and the discussion was Verizon's ambitious new 5G rollout, and I could tell you this did not come up.
So which are the countries in the world with the first rollout of 5G networks? What was the first country? China. The other common countries are Iran and Italy.
I mean, my jaw's on the floor.
So is there a relationship? Well, you tell me. Does that seem interesting, likely, unlikely, coincidence? I don't know, but I'm suspicious and concerned.
We've run out of time in this segment, and that will conclude the terrestrial radio portion of this, but I'd like to ask you to stick around for a little bonus discussion for the YouTube listeners. So any last thoughts for our AM radio listeners?
Take care of yourself, feel strong in doing that, and turn off all the news that's not necessarily helping you.
Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the slow medicine doctor, thank you for taking this hour this evening to discuss the coronavirus with us and some very practical and honestly easy to apply measures.
Pleasure. It's really great to be with you.